I'd like to address my question, if I may, to Gideon RACHMAN. Gideon, it would appear from many of the news feeds I've seen about Donald Trump is that he's on an unstoppable road back to the White House. How likely is it then that one or more of the legal challenges facing Trump will prevent him from being eligible to run?
Well, I think it's unlikely, very unlikely, that he'll be prevented from running. There is one case where a couple of states have tried to take him off the ballot because they say he attempted to stage an insurrection against the United States, and that would make him ineligible. But the Supreme Court's already started hearing that, and it sounds from the early arguments like they're going to chuck that case out. So I think he's a pretty dead cert to get the Republican nomination. And if you look at both the opinion polls and, frankly, the bookmakers' odds, the bookmakers now have him as the favourite to win, ahead of Biden. But I think a big question mark is whether all of these cases that he's facing, and we don't know because the court timetables are very uncertain, how many of them will come to trial. But if, he's already essentially been fined an enormous amount of money for a business fraud in New York just last week, I think the really damaging cases potentially to the voters are if, for example, the federal case in Washington about essentially trying to stage a coup d'etat in 2020, trying to overturn the result of the election, if that comes to trial and it's structured in such a way that they could reach a verdict quite quickly, it's possible, it would be a crazy soap opera, but it's possible that he would actually be sentenced to a jail term before the November vote. They'd appeal it. But even if he stays out of jail, which I think is likely because they can spin the process out, even a conviction, it suggests that, if you look at the polls again, that a lot of voters who are currently willing to vote for Trump say that they might change their minds if he were convicted in a court of law. And so I think these cases won't take him off the ballot, they won't make him ineligible, but they could change the course of the election.
Geraldine?
I'm not sure. I think that his supporters are so committed. They don't care what he does. And I think that they really believe that this is all a stitch-up and a witch hunt and all the things that he claims it to be. And, I'm not sure that they're reachable. So it's all about the swing voters, the suburban women voters, and that's where turnout is going to really count. It's hard to get Americans to the polls even when they're enthusiastic about a candidate. And I'm afraid the lack of enthusiasm about Biden is really concerning to me. And also there's a threat of a third-party candidate, which would only help Trump, even if that were not the intention of the person who was running, because the margins are likely to be so small and it'll all be decided in 5 states, which is the craziness of the American system. And I think we're at an absolutely perilous moment for American democracy.
Julian?
Obviously, from an Australian perspective, the Australian government will work with whoever America chooses. America's our most important ally, but we as Australians, I think, want an America that's strong, that's confident, that's taking its place in the world, particularly
that keeps its deals, like, for instance, on submarines.
Well, indeed, particularly at the moment, we need America to play a role because you've got autocrats in Russia and China, you've got the situation in the Middle East, you want people arguing for free trade, for the rules-based international order. We want an America that's engaged. And I think Americans face a terrible choice at this election. Even if the incumbent is returned, he will be 86 at the end of the term. Ronald Reagan was regarded as old when he finished office at 79. And on the other hand, you've got Donald Trump, who, in John Howard's words, ruled himself out of contention by his actions on the 6th of January. So it's a terrible time.
Do you agree with that?
I agree with John Howard, absolutely.
So, accepting, which is, I think, that, a reasonable position that we deal with whoever a country democratically elects, you think it would be worrying for Australia if Donald Trump was elected?
I think it's worrying for the West because he's demonstrated, I mean, what's the big battle that's ahead of us? It's a battle between the democracies and the autocracies. And when somebody who is an elected official fails to respect the decision of the voters, that's a bad sign for democracy. And when you're the leader of the free world, it's even a worse sign too.
MALARNDIRRI?
It's very troubling, Patricia, without a doubt.
You're worried about it?
No, I think we should be watching very closely what's going on in the United States. And yes, as Julian says, the Australian government will always work with whoever is elected and who does become president. But I think in this instance, when you've seen previous presidencies and elections run in the US, this one is one that we are, well, I certainly am watching very
So you're
closely.
worried about Donald Trump being the candidate?
I think we have to watch this very closely.
And what are you worried about?
Well, we've seen it in the previous term of the United States presidency, what has occurred. We've seen the impact on women and the behaviour towards women. We've seen the impact on their relationships with world leaders around the world. Some have been questionable, and I know that we are watching it, and I certainly am watching it very closely.